So yeah, let's read more on evolution. And I have chosen here the picture of Darwin. That is not to say that I deny any evolutionary theory. I'm definitely not a creationist. I don't think that intelligent design is a hypothesis that we should necessarily follow. But the only thing that I want to say is that we still should take evolutionary theory as more complex. And we have seen that the last time with regard to the modes of evolution, where the natural selection hypothesis is very often seen as the most important, while, however, there are also other explanations, as for example, genetic drift or kind of sexual selection, for example, migration hypotheses, and so on, that lead to a more complex picture. And why is that important? Because I think a lot of cultural phenomena that we see are often explained as results of natural selection, while they may have just occurred because of chance. And the more interesting article on that is actually on adaptationism. So adaptationism refers to family of views about the importance of natural selections in the evolution of organisms, in the construction of evolutionary explanations. Advocates of adaptationism view natural selection among individuals within a population as the only important cause of evolution, the evolution of a trait. They also typically believe that the construction of explanations based solely on natural selection to be the most fruitful way of making progress in evolutionary biology. An important alternative approach, pluralism, invokes historical contingency and developmental and genetic constraints in addition to natural selection as important causes of the evolution of a trait. Advocates of pluralism often also argue that the attempt to construct a natural selective explanation of a trait is not the most fruitful way to make explanatory progress. So people are divided on that. Let's look a little bit into the history of it. So the debate over adaptationism is often traced back to a 1979 paper by Stephen Gould and Richard Levinton called The Spandrels of San Marco and the Panglossian Paradigm, a critique of the adaptationist program, or simply the Spandrel paper. This paper is important, but in fact, this debate traces back to the 19th century with elements of adaptationism, of pluralism, or currently understood being present in the work of Henry Bates. I have a little bit of asthma. I hope you can apologize that. So in the early 20th century, views that we now call adaptationism and pluralism were enunciated by biologists. Among them were two of the then and now most influential evolutionary biologists, Ronald Fisher and Sewall Wright. The central idea of Fisher's important 1930 book, The Genetical Theory of Natural Selection, is the natural selection is the only important influence on trait evolution. This is the central text of adaptationism, indeed. It has an honored place in the minds of evolutionary biologists, no matter what their position on adaptationism is. Issued again 1958 in a revised edition and in 1999 in a variorum edition, this book has garnered over 8,400 journal citations. Okay. Sewall Wright's pluralist view of evolution was presented in several places with his 1931 paper, Evolution in Mendelian Populations, and the 1977 book, Evolution and the Genetics of Population. The paper has received only 3,400 citations. So these works by Fisher and Wright are canonical contributions to the field of evolutionary biology. They were based partially on prior claims and counterclaims. So where's the important stuff that starts? That's what I wonder right now. All about the... let's see, is there anything... Is there anything of importance here? They just like mention how they were important in the debate. It is neither the beginning of the debate over adaptationism nor something much narrower, for example, a little more than the attempted intellectual lynching of social biology, such claims are best historically incorrect. So let's look. Recent work in philosophy of biology has helped uncover 3 flavors of adaptationism. These reflect differences in belief among current professional developers and users of evolutionary arguments. The first flavor, empirical adaptationism, is the view that natural selection is ubiquitous, I don't know the word, free from constraints, and provides a sufficient explanation for the evolution of most traits which are locally optimal. That is, the observed trait is superior to any alternative that does not require redefining the organism. So I guess blue eyes does not redefine the organism, and therefore it is unimportant, even though it may rely on genetic drift. And only if you have natural selection, so the argument, the organism gets redefined. This is a claim about the realized influence of natural selection on the evolution of traits as compared to other evolutionary influences. The second flavor, explanatory adaptationism, is the view that explaining traits as adaptations resulting from natural selection is the central goal of evolutionary biology. This is a claim about the greater importance of some kinds of evolution. So I guess they just want to say, yeah, but overall, evolution is driven by natural selection, like the most important parts of it. The third flavor, methodological adaptationism, is the view that looking first for adaptation via natural selection is the most efficient approach when trying to understand the evolution of a given trait. Okay, this could be true even if adaptations are rare. Okay, these are the flavors, and they are logically independent. Okay, so let's look whether there's any more interesting stuff in here. So here's a definition of adaptationism. Natural selection is a powerful and ubiquitous force, and there are few constraints on the biological variation that fuels it. I don't think this is very interesting here anymore. I don't know how you see that. It just discusses them, testing and standards of evidence. That may be interesting, but we are going here now into details. So, I mean, I guess it's interesting. Do optimality models describe evolution? Well, I mean, I guess we come back to these later, to these questions. Let's see at the concluding remarks. That sounds interesting. Why should biologists and philosophers care about the debate over adaptationism? This debate has been and will continue to be important to biologists because it helps clarify how to do better evolutionary biology. Despite this, a minority of currently active biologists contribute to the debate about adaptationism, and many ignore or disparage it for a variety of reasons. Many of the important points that have arisen from the debate, such as how to structure empirical tests or adaptive hypothesis and optimality models, go unheeded. For example, claims for local optimality continue to appear that lack a specification of a single alternative hypothesis to the adaptive hypothesis. This lack inevitably leaves ambiguous the status of the adaptive hypothesis. In addition, standards for rejection of the only adaptive hypothesis continue to be rarely delineated, if at all. Yeah, I didn't understand that. It seems to me that most people, because of how sciences work, tend to look for natural selection because it's better to test for it. This is what I understand. So although, we go back to the article on evolution, although there's a widespread agreement that there are multiple modes of evolution, much contemporary work has been focusing on natural selection. Whether this focus is a good thing or not is in part a debate over adaptationism. So this is how far we had gotten before. That is, do we have reason to think that natural selection is the most prevalent or most important mode of evolution? Should scientific methodologies be geared towards testing natural selection hypotheses or toward a variety of possible evolutionary modes? The focus on natural selection has also led to a large literature on the concept of fitness. Given that population genetics definitions and other definitions of natural selection typically invoke fitness, a natural selection explanation of why X was more successful than Y might invoke access higher fitness. What fitness means, what entities it applies to, genes, organisms, groups, individuals, types, what sort of probabilities it invokes, if any, and how it should be calculated are all under philosophical dispute. There is also large literature on conceptually and empirically distinguishing natural selection from genetic drift. Migration, mutation, and sexual selection have received less attention from philosophers of biology. Other topics in the philosophy of evolution. Okay, this is that debate on adaptationism. What is your opinion on that? I guess most people are adaptionists, but again, like when it comes down to humans making music, it seems to be driven by chance. Or why did Debussy write a certain piece? Like, or why did classical music evolve over Baroque? Do we really want to argue that there's natural selection for these things, or do we have to develop other hypotheses, especially if we transfer evolutionary theory to other fields than biology? And it seems to be reasonable to do that, but I think we should be then aware also of the shortcomings of that theory and not just blindly apply it. So some of the work in the philosophy of evolution deals with a controversial issue, with controversial issues. There's, of course, the debate over creationism. The vast majority of philosophers agree that creationism has significantly less evidence in its favor as compared to the abundant evidence in favor of evolution. They also agree that creationism ought not to be taught in a public school, science classroom, but they sometimes disagree over the reasons why. Anyway, I suggest that at another time we read about creationism. And like that was helpful to distinguish adaptationists from pluralists. I hope that helped you too. It seems like in practical research, if I understood that right, the adaptationist hypothesis is just followed through because it's easier to work with it in the empirically oriented fields of biology. But that doesn't mean that it's entirely true. So, and I think we should take that as a warning to interpret every phenomenon that we encounter on our human bodies as a result of a necessary evolutionary advantage. Like stupid things like, why do some men have bigger, or women have bigger, So maybe that's based on selective sexual selection, right? Or maybe it's also just driven by chance that some individuals survived and they just had bigger whatever. Okay, thank you very much. If you like this, then read more of these articles on evolution or listen more to my channels and subscribe. Bye-bye.